The music, the costumes, the hair. There's only one ABBA. And after decades of going their own way,
Benny Andersson has been a guiding force in music for decades, one of the great creative minds who helped shape the sound of a generation. As part of ABBA, his melodies and arrangements carried songs that became universal anthems, music that still echoes through parties, films, and concerts long after the band stopped recording. To millions around the globe, Benny's music was the soundtrack to their happiest memories. Yet behind the glitter, the iconic outfits, and the endless applause, Benny's own story was layered with challenges. The end of ABBA wasn't just the end of a career chapter. It was the unraveling of personal bonds, the collapse of stability, and years of private battles he never spoke about. For most of his life, he chose silence over spectacle, letting his music do the talking. But now, at 78, Benny has finally peeled back the curtain. For the first time, he has spoken honestly about his childhood, his relationships, the woman who shaped him, the band that defined him, and what he really feels about ABBA's legacy today. To understand that confession, we need to travel back to where it all began, and retrace the path that led him from a boy in Stockholm to one of the most celebrated songwriters of all time. Benny was born Göran Bror, Benny Andersson, on December 16, 1946, in the Vasa district of Stockholm. He grew up in a modest but warm household, the son of Gösta, a civil engineer, and Leila, a dedicated mother. He also had a younger sister, Eva-Lise, born just 2 years after him. His childhood wasn't glamorous, but what it lacked in wealth, it made up for in music. Both his father and grandfather were avid accordion players, and family gatherings often turned into impromptu concerts. It was his grandfather, Ephraim, who first placed music directly into Benny's small hands. At just 6 years old, Benny was given his very own accordion, a gift that would shape his life forever. He spent hours squeezing out sounds, learning the rhythms of Swedish folk songs, and discovering the joy of melody. At first, it was just a child's fascination, but quickly it grew into something deeper, a calling that would become the foundation of his destiny. The world was opening up musically at that time, and Benny was curious about everything. His father introduced him to Schlager, a popular European style of catchy, sentimental tunes, while records from abroad brought him a wider palette. The first albums he owned were Caterina Valente's Du bist Musik and Elvis Presley's Jailhouse Rock. Elvis in particular struck him, not just because of the energy and charisma, but because of the piano-driven B-side track, Treat Me Nice. That one song convinced Benny that the piano was more than just an instrument. It was the heartbeat of modern music. When he was 10, he got his own piano, and from that moment forward, it became his second home. Without formal lessons, he taught himself how to play, listening to records over and over until he could copy the chords and riffs. It wasn't long before he was experimenting, bending melodies, and writing little sketches of songs that hinted at his future genius. School, however, was another matter. While his classmates focused on lessons, Benny's mind was already elsewhere, on music, melodies, and performances. By the time he reached 15, the classroom walls could no longer hold him. He left school early, determined to pursue his passion in the real world. He started playing at youth clubs, honing his performance skills and testing his compositions in front of live audiences. This was also the time he met Christina Grönvall, his first serious girlfriend. The relationship was intense and real, the kind of young love that becomes inseparable from the memories of those years. Together, they would have 2 children, Peter, born in 1963, and Helene, born in 1965. Becoming a father as a teenager brought responsibilities that few of his peers could even imagine, but it didn't stop him from chasing his dream. In many ways, music and family became intertwined, with Christina often joining him on his early musical ventures. In 1964, Benny and Christina joined a group with a name that carried a cheeky inside joke, Elverkets Spelmanslag, which translates to the Electricity Board Folk Music Group. They chose it as a playful nod to their electric instruments, a modern twist on the traditional music Benny had grown up with. The band mostly played instrumentals, with quirky covers like Baby Elephant Walk, but for Benny, this was much more than a novelty act. It was his laboratory, the place where he began to experiment with writing original songs. The thrill of shaping something completely new, something that didn't exist until he put notes together, gave him a taste of the creative power he would later wield so masterfully. Then, in October 1964, everything changed. Benny was invited to join a pop group called the Hep Stars, a decision that would transform his life almost overnight. As their keyboardist, Benny found himself in a band that was quickly gaining traction among Swedish youth. Just a few months after he joined, in March 1965, the Hep Stars exploded onto the charts with their hit single Cadillac. Almost instantly, they became the biggest pop band in Sweden, chased by screaming fans and performing to packed venues. Benny wasn't just the guy behind the keyboard anymore. He was a star, a teen idol, and the musical engine driving the band's success. At first, the Hep Stars were known for their covers of international hits. They were energetic, flashy, and exactly what Swedish audiences craved in the mid-1960s. But Benny wasn't content with simply copying others. He began writing songs for the band, pushing them to create original material that reflected their own identity. It was here that Benny's talents as a songwriter began to shine. He discovered that he had a gift not just for melodies, but for arrangements that could stick in a listener's head long after the music stopped. The Hep Stars quickly became more than just Sweden's answer to the Beatles. They became a launchpad for Benny's growing ambition. The success gave him confidence, experience, and a glimpse of what was possible if he could keep climbing. What he didn't know yet was that fate was preparing to bring him together with 3 other musicians, a meeting that would change the history of pop music forever. After his whirlwind years with the Hep Stars, Benny Andersson found himself standing at a crossroads. Fame had given him a taste of success, but it hadn't satisfied his hunger for something greater. The band's popularity in Sweden was immense, but Benny was restless, searching for a sound that would last longer than the fleeting pop trends of the mid-1960s. His restless creativity demanded more than just cover songs or local fame. It was during this search that fate began weaving the threads that would lead him toward ABBA, though neither he nor anyone else could have predicted it at the time. It was in 1966 that Benny's path first crossed with Björn Ulvaeus, a member of the folk pop group the Hootenanny Singers. At first it was casual, 2 musicians recognizing each other's talent. But when they sat down to write together, something clicked. Their creative chemistry was immediate, natural, and undeniable. Benny had a gift for melody and arrangements, while Björn brought structure, clever lyrics, and an instinct for storytelling. Together, they discovered a partnership that could turn ideas into polished, unforgettable songs. What began as casual jam sessions soon developed into a full-fledged songwriting team. They started composing for other Swedish artists, testing their skills on different genres, and slowly building a reputation as songwriters with an ear for hits. Around the same time, Benny's personal life was shifting. His relationship with Christina Grönvall, the mother of his 2 children, began to fracture under the pressure of his growing career. Life on the road with the Hep Stars kept him away from home, and the tension eventually became too much. By the late 1960s, their romance had unraveled, leaving Benny at a personal low point even as his professional life began climbing in a new direction. It was during this fragile period that Benny met Anni-Frid Lyngstad, known as Frida, a talented singer with a striking voice and a charm that captivated audiences. Their connection was instant, and before long, they became both a romantic and musical pair. But the true turning point came when Benny and Björn's paths intertwined further with 2 women who would soon become inseparable from their story. Agneta Fältskog and Anni-Frid Lyngstad. Both were already successful singers in Sweden in their own right. Agneta, with her crystalline voice, had built a solo career, while Frida, with her deep, soulful tone, had captivated audiences on stage and television. By the late 1960s, the 4 of them, Benny, Björn, Agneta, and Frida, began experimenting with performing together, often blending their voices during casual sessions or small performances. What emerged from those moments was nothing short of magic. At first, it wasn't even a formal band. They appeared on a few projects together, testing the waters. In 1970, Benny and Björn released their album Lycka, Happiness, which featured backing vocals from Agnetha and Frida. It was on tracks like Hage, Gamel Man that people first caught a glimpse of the vocal blend that would later conquer the world. That song, though modest in scale, gave them a taste of what was possible when the four voices joined together. Something unique was happening, a sound that was instantly recognizable, rich with harmonies, and unlike anything else in pop music at the time. The group began entering song contests, hoping to break through internationally. Their first real attempt came in 1973 when they competed in Sweden's Melodifestivalen with the song Ring Ring. The track showcased their now signature harmonies, and while it didn't win the competition, it became a major hit across parts of Europe. It was clear they were on the verge of something huge, and Benny knew it. With Björn's partnership, Agnetha's ethereal vocals, and Frida's warmth, they had all the ingredients of a global phenomenon. They just needed the right moment and the right song to ignite it all. That moment arrived in 1974. Entering Melodifestivalen again, they performed a song that would change their lives forever. Waterloo. With its infectious energy, glam-inspired style, and perfect blend of voices, the performance exploded with charisma. They didn't just win Melodifestivalen, they advanced to the Eurovision Song Contest, representing Sweden on one of the most watched stages in Europe. When they stepped onto the Eurovision stage in Brighton, dressed in flamboyant costumes and bursting with confidence, they delivered Waterloo with such force that the audience couldn't resist. On April 6, 1974, ABBA was crowned the winner of Eurovision, and history was made. Waterloo wasn't just a Eurovision song, it became a global hit, topping charts across Europe and even cracking the competitive American market. Practically overnight, the four members went from local Swedish stars to international sensations. What set them apart wasn't just their talent or their looks, but the way their voices meshed together to create something transcendent. Benny, ever the perfectionist, worked tirelessly behind the scenes, crafting arrangements that elevated the vocals into lush, unforgettable productions. His musical vision, paired with Björn's lyricism and Agnetha and Frida's unmatched harmonies, created a formula that felt unstoppable. The years that followed cemented their place in music history. With songs like Mamma Mia, SOS, and Fernando, ABBA became a household name not just in Europe but around the world. Each new release seemed to capture the spirit of the time while also offering something timeless. Benny's genius at the keyboard and in the studio was the invisible hand guiding it all. He wasn't always in the spotlight. Agnetha and Frida, with their radiant voices, often took center stage, but Benny's fingerprints were everywhere. Without his melodies, arrangements, and creative vision, ABBA simply would not have become what it did. By the late 1970s, ABBA was at the absolute peak of fame. Their albums sold in the tens of millions, their tours sold out instantly, and their songs topped charts across continents. For Benny, it was a dream realized, but also the beginning of new challenges. Success brought unimaginable rewards, but it also magnified every tension within the group. Two married couples in one band meant that the music and personal lives were intertwined in ways that made everything more complicated. And while the world danced to their hits, behind the curtain, cracks were already beginning to form. By the end of the 1970s, ABBA was unstoppable. They were no longer just Eurovision winners or pop stars. They had become a global phenomenon. Their music reached far beyond Europe, conquering markets in Australia, Japan, and even the fiercely competitive United States. Songs like Dancing Queen, Take a Chance on Me, and Knowing Me, Knowing You didn't just top charts. They became cultural touchstones, the kind of music that could define an era. Yet even as the world celebrated ABBA's shimmering success, the foundation beneath the band was beginning to crack. What the fans saw, the smiling faces, the glittering costumes, the flawless harmonies, was only part of the story. Behind the curtain, tensions were mounting, both personally and professionally, and the weight of fame was taking its toll on Benny and his bandmates. The most obvious strain came from the fact that ABBA was more than just a band. It was two couples. Benny had fallen deeply in love with Anni-Frid Lyngstad, while Björn was married to Agnetha Fältskog. In the early years, this gave ABBA a sense of warmth and unity that audiences adored. The music reflected their real-life bonds. Love songs carried genuine emotion, heartbreak ballads hinted at vulnerability, and every performance was infused with a sense of intimacy that came from their closeness. But as the years passed, the demands of constant touring, recording, and fame put enormous stress on those relationships. By 1979, cracks had become impossible to ignore. Björn and Agnetha's marriage was the first to collapse, their divorce finalized just as ABBA was preparing to release new music. It was a devastating blow, not just to them personally, but to the group as a whole. The image of two happy couples had been part of ABBA's charm, and now that illusion was shattered. Agnetha, already struggling with the pressures of fame and her own battles with stage fright, found herself under an even harsher spotlight. Yet, remarkably, the band pressed on, channeling their heartbreak into their music. Songs like The Winner Takes It All became not just chart-topping hits but emotional confessions set to melody. Many fans believed it was Agnetha's personal story laid bare, and while Benny and Björn insisted it wasn't written directly about her, the rawness of her performance suggested otherwise. Benny and Frida, too, began to struggle. Their romance, once a source of strength, buckled under the same pressures that had doomed Björn and Agnetha. Fame magnifies everything, the good and the bad, and for Benny, who had always been a perfectionist in the studio, the endless pursuit of musical brilliance began to clash with the delicate balance of his personal life. By 1981, his marriage to Frida also fell apart, leaving all four members of ABBA navigating heartbreak even as they stood side by side on stage. The irony was that some of their greatest music emerged during this period of personal collapse. Albums like Super Trooper and The Visitors carried a darker, more mature tone, reflecting the turmoil within the band. The lyrics spoke of loneliness, endings, and uncertainty, even as the melodies remained as captivating as ever. Fans adored the music, but few realized just how much pain was hidden behind those songs. To write, record, and perform music about love and loss while living those very struggles in real life required a strength that most people could hardly imagine. For Benny, the collapse of ABBA was not just professional, it was deeply personal. The band wasn't just a career. It was his life's work, his partnership, and his family all rolled into one. To see it unravel felt like watching everything he had built crumble in front of him. When the group decided to step away in 1982, there was no official announcement of a breakup. There was no farewell tour, no dramatic ending. They simply stopped recording, each member drifting into their own projects, too exhausted and too wounded to carry on. The world, however, noticed. Fans who had grown up with ABBA's music were left in shock. For years, people speculated whether they would ever return, whether the four would put aside their differences for one more tour, one more album. But Benny, more than anyone, knew the truth. ABBA was over, at least for that moment in time. The magic that had carried them through their glory years had been replaced by silence, and he wasn't sure if it could ever be recaptured. In the years that followed, Benny faced the difficult task of reinventing himself. Unlike many pop stars who fade into obscurity after their bands dissolve, he refused to stop creating. His partnership with Björn endured, and together they began exploring new musical directions. They composed Chess, a musical that debuted in 1986 and produced the international hit One Night in Bangkok. It was a chance for Benny to show the world that his talents extended beyond ABBA, that he could create music with depth and sophistication outside the realm of pop. Yet even as he moved forward, the shadow of ABBA lingered. Fans never stopped asking about a reunion, never stopped replaying the old records, never stopped hoping for the impossible. Benny's personal life also shifted after ABBA. In 1981, not long after his separation from Frida, he met Mona Nurklit, a Swedish television presenter. They married the following year, and their relationship gave Benny a sense of stability that had been missing for much of his life. Together they had a son, Ludwig, in 1982, grounding Benny in family once more. Unlike the turbulence of his earlier relationships, his marriage to Mona brought him peace. something he desperately needed after the whirlwind of ABBA's rise and fall. Still, the wounds from those years never fully healed. In interviews, Benny often avoided talking directly about the pain of ABBA's breakup or the divorces that coincided with it. Instead, he let the music, both old and new, speak for him. Songs like The Day Before You Came and Slipping Through My Fingers seemed to hold pieces of his truth, reflections of love lost and time slipping away. Fans could hear the sadness in his melodies, even if Benny himself rarely put it into words. As the 1980s turned into the 1990s, ABBA's music never truly disappeared. Compilation albums and reissues kept their legacy alive, and a new generation discovered their songs through films, commercials, and eventually, the hit stage musical Mamma Mia. For Benny, it was surreal to watch ABBA become bigger in death than they had been in life. While the band had once been dismissed by critics as disposable pop, time had revealed the brilliance of their craft. Benny, the man who had always preferred the background to the spotlight, was now being celebrated as one of the greatest pop composers of all time. Yet privately, he remained the same, a man who carried both pride and pain from the years that had defined him. As the 1990s unfolded, something remarkable began to happen. While Benny had long accepted that ABBA was behind him, their music refused to fade away. Young people who hadn't even been alive when Dancing Queen first topped the charts were discovering the songs, singing them, and buying the old records. A new wave of appreciation swept across Europe and then spread to the rest of the world. This wasn't nostalgia anymore, it was revival. At first, Benny and the other members were cautious, even skeptical. They had moved on with their lives, and the idea of returning to the spotlight didn't appeal to them. But as tribute bands, musicals, and films began to emerge, it became clear that ABBA was no longer just a pop group from the past. It was a cultural phenomenon that had taken on a life of its own. Benny found himself reflecting on how something they created in their youth, with all its innocence and energy, had transformed into a timeless soundtrack for generations. And though he was reluctant to step back into the center of it all, he couldn't deny that there was something deeply moving about watching teenagers and grandparents alike sing the same lyrics with the same joy. The turning point came in 1999, with the premiere of Mamma Mia, the musical built around ABBA's songs. At first, Benny didn't know what to expect. Musicals were a different world, and there was always the risk of it falling flat. But when the curtain rose and the audience reacted with sheer delight, Benny realized that ABBA's story wasn't ending. It was beginning all over again in a new form. Mamma Mia wasn't just a hit. It was a phenomenon that brought the music to new corners of the globe. It proved that the melodies he had written in the 1970s weren't just tied to one era. They had become part of the universal language of music. The show later inspired 2 blockbuster films, each reigniting the flame for millions more fans. Benny, though reserved as always, couldn't help but feel a quiet pride. What he and Björn had created all those years ago had transcended time, style, and even their own personal struggles. It was no longer just about them. It belonged to the world. Still, despite this resurgence, Benny remained the same man he had always been, more comfortable at a piano than in the spotlight. While fans begged for an ABBA reunion, he held firm for years, insisting that what had been done in the 1970s should remain untouched. He didn't want to tarnish the legacy with something that felt forced or artificial. Yet, as he grew older, his perspective began to shift. Life has a way of softening old wounds and reframing past decisions. By his 70s, Benny had seen friends pass away, had watched time steal away chances, and he realized that sometimes saying never only leaves regrets. And so, after decades of speculation, something that once seemed impossible happened. ABBA reunited to record new music. In 2021, they released Voyage, their first album in nearly 40 years. For Benny, it was both surreal and profoundly emotional. Sitting in the studio with Agnetha, Frida, and Björn again felt like stepping back in time, yet also confronting all the years in between. They weren't the same people anymore, but the chemistry was still there. The spark that had defined their sound hadn't died. Voyage wasn't just an album. It was a gift to the fans and, in many ways, a gift to themselves. Benny admitted that it was their way of closing the circle, of proving to themselves that even after all the ups and downs, they could still create something beautiful together. And when the songs were released, the world responded with overwhelming love. People wept, celebrated, and rediscovered the magic of ABBA. For Benny, it was the final confirmation that the band's legacy was something far bigger than any of them could have imagined. He no longer had to wonder if their music would be remembered. It was clear ABBA would outlive them all. At 78, Benny reflected on his journey with surprising honesty. He spoke not only of the triumphs, but also of the losses, the failed marriages, the broken friendships, the loneliness that sometimes crept in even at the height of success.